Hey everybody, Payments Professor here, and I want to welcome you all to the Payments Podium. Today we're going to have some fun. Today we're going to be talking with Marcia Killingsmith, and she works as a consultant. She's actually the founder and CEO of FinTech Consulting, and she's helping financial institutions to be able to get connected, to get prepared, to be able to use things like FedNow to work with instant and real-time payments. And with what we're seeing in the industry, this is a huge area and there's a lot to learn. So, Marcia, I want to welcome you to the Payments Podium.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me on. Really happy to share some of my insights on helping small and mid-sized banks get started with instant payments.
All right, but before we get there, important question I got to ask. And I asked this really of everybody the first time that come on the Payments Podium. Because, growing up, none of us wanted to grow up and be into payments. So I want to know, what made you want to get up into payments? How did you actually get your start in electronic payments? I mean, did you actually go to school for it? Nobody's told me that yet, but what happened to make it to where you are now, to where you're actually in the payments?
That's actually a really fun question. I think I got connected. I remember back in the days of Google, the ISIS wallet, pre-terrorism, was my first introduction kind of to the fintech space. I was really fascinated by the idea of what a Google wallet could do. And then the other thing that caught my interest was, I think it was like I read an article about how in Korea that people were able, on their commute to or from work, at the rest stations, they would have these billboards with the groceries, with all these different grocery items, and they could scan the food items as they were going through the transit station. And when they got home, there'd be food delivered at their door. And I just thought that was the coolest thing ever. And ever since then, I've been just like fascinated by the opportunities that are opened up with this changing payment landscape that we have.
Now, I do want to point out, because you said something that takes me even back in the payments world. You said the ISIS wallet. And for those listening, ISIS was a company, nothing to do with the terrorist group whatsoever. And it's been a couple of decades now that they existed, but it just happened to be they had that name before the terrorist group got to be known. So it was one of those that what can you do type situations, but they're totally unrelated things in case you're listening. All right. But now you're working in consulting and you're helping financial institutions. Actually, tell me what it is that you're doing now with financial institutions to help them out.
One of the things, most recently, I was working at FIS Global, and I was building out the real-time payment rails, a managed service function for basically all the non-tier one banks. And what I uncovered through that process is that even though the Federal Reserve is pushing FedNow and has lots of great free material and free resources out there, that a lot of banks still just don't understand what it is and the value that it brings. And, I really feel that instant payments is going to be transforming the financial landscape. It's going to be introducing a lot of interesting opportunities around embedded finance. And I think it's really important for small and mid-sized banks to offer this as a service so that they can stay relevant to the customers that they serve. And so I'm here to make the process easy. Like, I want to show you guys what it takes to get connected to the instant payment rails and kind of help the banks navigate through those key decisions that they need to make in order to connect to the rails.
I am with you. I know actually from studying the globe that we're about to see a transformation in the electronic payments world due to FedNow instant payments being available for all financial institutions. So I don't think we need to sell people on it, but I would start asking this, because you said there's key decisions that got to be made, things that I know you can help with, but I would ask, what are some of those key decisions? Let's start off like, what do you would say is the first decision, the first thing you need to consider when it comes to you're going to start offering FedNow is what?
The most important thing is just to understand, why are you connecting to the instant payment rails? Like, are you trying to retain your existing customers? Are you doing it because it's trendy? Are you looking to drive revenue from it? Are you using it as a tool to build up your asset base? Is this going to be for consumers? Is this for small businesses? Like, who do you want to serve by by connecting to the instant payment network. Because that is the foundation for all the decisions that you make after that.
What if somebody comes, because I've heard this before. I've actually heard this answer. I remember back in the days of check processing when we started going to electronic check processing and Check 21 came out. What if somebody's answer is everybody else is doing it?
Well, I mean, and that's fine. I mean, that means you're just responding, which I guess is a good start. So once you've decided that you want to participate, well, then you have to take a look at your customers and say, well, I'm going to do this. Where do I start? And so you're going to have to take a look at your customer base and look at things like, well, what kind of customers do I represent? Am I serving the needs of, say, maybe I have a lot of car dealers in my portfolio. Can I help with auto lending? Do I have construction workers in my portfolio? Can I help them, with the construction lending? Is it more like I have a lot of young people and they're doing gig economy work, and I want to make sure that I can receive their gig economy payroll payouts. So you need to look at, if you decide you want to go participate, that's great. So just get a better understanding of who your customer is so that you make sure that as you're making your decisions to connect to the network, that you're really building out the solution in a way that makes sense for your customer base.
So that is an important question. Why are you connecting, figuring out your purpose, looking at what are those use cases out there? Or do you ever tell anybody the use case of just being able to receive? Because I know I go out and talk to a lot of financial institutions. I say, number one, just start off receiving, get to where you can do that, and then let's move on to the next step.
That's the absolute best way to go. Banks tend to be very risk averse. And so the easiest way to get started with instant payments and dip your toe in the water is to start at receiving, because it's incredibly a low risk capability. Yeah, you don't need to do any updates to your user experience. You can just work with your third party service provider to turn on to sign your contracts and turn on the capabilities. And what we see from my experience working with the clearinghouse is that from the day you launch with instant payments, there's already transactions flowing through the network within minutes to your customer base. So by not participating in the network, you're missing on that opportunity to serve your customers. And turning on receive is really a low risk way to immediately start learning about the network and serve the needs of your customers.
I gotta just say, because I want to make sure I heard you right and that people listening heard this too, because I say this as well to people from my experience. If you turn on receive with RTP, and FedNow is coming still, it might be out by the time this recording hits because we're anxiously waiting. But if you turn on receive with RTP, day one, within minutes, is what you even said, you're going to see activity coming in.
That is
Did
correct.
I hear that correct?
We, during my time at FIS, we turned on quite a few smaller banks, mid-sized banks. And, we didn't even have to run any test transactions through the network because they were seeing transactions flow through almost immediately. It's pretty exciting. And impactful to banks. I think one of the big concerns we've seen, I don't know if it's okay to touch on this, but with the Silicon Valley Bank and the concerns around depository assets, this is a really easy way to help build for banks, for financial institutions to build their deposit asset base. You turn on a real-time payment receive and those deposits start coming in, and that also may help with the stickiness of customers, because if your end users are wanting to be able to collect these payments and you're not there to service them, those deposits are going into somebody else's bank account. So it's kind of like a double whammy by not turning on instant payments. You're missing out on.
Anybody in marketing who's listening is loving you right now, because you're giving us purposes for receiving. You talked about the car dealers, the auto lending, the gig economy. Now you just said, whoa, you want to build some deposits, create stickiness. This is an easy sell all of a sudden. All right. So we've got that. We've said, why are you connecting? We said, what is your purpose? We know now that receiving is one of the options for connecting. What is the next thing that you would say, hey, financial institution, you want to get in the game of RTP, the game of FedNow, the world of instant real-time payments? This is the next thing that you need to consider.
I know a lot of banks are really looking forward to the FedNow network, which I think it's great. I think when the Federal Reserve comes online with the FedNow network, that's going to open a whole realm of new payment methods, especially since I hear they've got the government on board and there'll be some transactions happening there. But right now, through the clearinghouse network, there's more than $25 billion that came through in Q1 of this year. So there's a lot of money already flowing through the network today. And my advice and recommendation for financial institutions is they want to participate on both networks, not just the FedNow network, because in order to serve your customer base and really take advantage of the value that this brings, is you're going to want to participate on both. And the level of effort to be on both networks is not really any different than being on one network. So if you're taking the time to be on one, you should be on both. And the other thing to know is there's no interoperability between the two rails. So if you're not on both, you're missing, the bulk of the network. And it's going to take a little while. No matter how excited people are about FedNow, it's still going to take them a little while to ramp up, build the pipeline of transactions and activities through that network.
All right, I got to play devil's advocate with you for a minute, because I talk to a lot of people too and tell them, hey, both networks is the way to go. And if you're going to go through the process of getting connected to one, it is not that much more to getting connected to a second one. But then this is where the operations person jumps up and says, but then don't I have to balance two different accounts, two master accounts? Don't I have to then balance what I have having over in RTP and having happen over in FedNow and, manage two different accounts? What do you actually say to that?
So when you're talking about two different accounts, you're definitely going to have a reconciliation process, and once you establish the process for one bank, you can follow a similar process for the other account. So there will be a sub account at the Federal Reserve where these transactions will come through. You'll want to make sure that you're looking at your reporting and doing your reconciliations. But once you establish the process on how you're going to manage the real-time flows for one network, you can basically mirror that process for the second network.
Yeah, I see. I'm the same way. That's what I tell people too, is it's like, once you figured it out for one, it's not going to be that much different for the other. And if you even go look at the reporting that is out there, they're titled different, but they're the same data and same information. So I don't really see it being that much of a burden to be able to work on both. All right. So next thing, what would be the next step that people need to consider in all of this? Because they're looking, again, we've got how they're connecting, what they're connecting to, considering both networks, and, go ahead and get connected to both networks. What would you tell people? Next thing you need to do is consider this.
Briefly talk again about we talked about receive, but just as a sequencing of events. You test the waters with receive, get comfortable with your operational support and your processes and who you contact. And then you should open up and explore adding send to your portfolio, because send is really where the interesting action starts happening. This is a service that you can actually make money on, that people are willing to pay for the ability to transmit money in real time. But there's, a lot of things that need to be thought about when you're doing a send transaction. And that and then also thinking about request for payment, that requires you to have receive and send. And that also opens up more doors. And so there's decision points that come up based on that, because you need to be thinking about the long-term strategy and your technology platform. If your intent is ultimately to be able to support real-time payment send and request for payment, then your interface, your user experience, and your technology provider needs to be able to support that longer-term vision. So thinking about the flow and deciding if you want these on your roadmap is going to be really critical, even if you're only starting out with receive.
Okay, well, there's a lot right there because you said you can make money off of this. And I know that gets everybody's attention once you say you can make money off of it. But I want to point out, too, it's on the send, not on the receive. The receive would just be something, hey, it comes into people's accounts. Maybe on the business side, if there's invoices or something like that you're providing extra services, I could see that. But typically on the receive, I don't see a lot
Well,
of money
it's
being
kind of
made there.
interesting. I mean, that's like kind of the first thought is, you definitely don't want to be charging customers for small dollar transactions coming through the real time payment network. But one of the things that has come up in conversations, and I'm not necessarily advocating for this because I think it's still maybe more discovery work is maybe required, but if a bank charges for a large dollar wire transaction today that's inbound, and they want to start accepting real-time payments, for them it's a better experience because they have that certainty that they've gotten that payment. They know exactly how much money they're getting. They get the transparency around the data. And for them, there's a lot of value in being able to receive a large dollar real-time payment transaction. And if you charge them to receive a wire today, maybe it makes sense to also charge a fee for the ability to receive that large dollar real-time payment transaction. So it's just something to have on the table, something to discuss in strategy meetings. So there is, the potential to get revenue even on a received transaction.
Well, okay. Well, let's go hit the send for just a second because also that keyword you just said is strategy. Strategy makes everything a whole lot of fun. We know that one of the key things in both RTP and in FedNow is you have to be able to receive 24/7, 365. Every day, all day, any day, you've got to be able to receive transactions coming in. Do you talk to or coach or consult with people and tell them you don't have to do the same thing on send? You can choose who sends and you can choose when they are able to send. And for other, additional risk controls, put limits on how much they send. So when you're guiding people through that send process, are you letting them know it's not the same as the receive?
Yes, there are definitely a lot of controls with regards to the 24/7, like control over the timing of it. The feedback that I got, because I got that questions from banks when I was working with the clearinghouse, and the feedback that I got is that the requirements are that they do need to enable them to let their customers send 24/7. And that is one of the value props of the network. However, that being said, there's an awful lot of controls that you have around this ability to send. So you can pick like who you want to approve to be able to participate, which of your customers are you enabling? So if you're very conservative, maybe you just onesie twosie give permission to your customers. You have the ability to control the limits. So the network allows up to $1 million per transaction, but you can start off really safe. Maybe you say, okay, I'm going to start out with my initial customers. I'm going to start with maybe $5,000, and then you can open up that to $10,000. So you can have a graduated strategy on a customer by customer or business by business basis. You may want to have just like a standard threshold and then have an exception process. So maybe for a good customer, for a customer that has a need to do a very large dollar transaction, maybe there's an internal approval process that you go through, or maybe there's a special fee that you can put on for opening the limit for that particular customer for that transaction. You want to maybe consider over a certain threshold requiring multiple approvers. So there's a lot of controls and a lot of levers that can be applied to help you mitigate the risk associated with doing a real-time payment send transaction.
Yeah, I love having all those different controls, and decisioning points is what they are too, to be able to be in place to give people that type of, hey, you get to decide how this is going to work. It's not forced upon you, because I think that helps with adoption. Now, something else that you did bring up that I know I've got to ask because it's such a key part of working with RTP or FedNow is you did mention the limit. RTP is 1 million, and it's confusing because FedNow is 500,000. So there's inconsistency. And you also mentioned they're not interoperable. But a key part is the technology providers. It is working with the technology providers. So what are you telling these financial institutions that if you're going to work with technology providers, whether it's a third party or even sometimes in-house, what are the things you need to be looking at from the technology provider point
I
of view?
think there's a great question. I think the easiest place to start is just with the partners you're already working with, because a lot of these third party service providers have already gone out of their way to build out those user experiences and get connected to the clearinghouse. I mean, both the clearinghouse and FedNow. So very likely, if they're a payment service provider, they've got the hooks, they've got a user experience that you can take advantage of. And so what you want to do is just start first, because you don't want to be building your own connections to the network. That's a lot of overhead, a lot of resources, a lot of time and complexity that is totally unneeded. So connecting with your existing providers and ask them what they have in place. Do they support receive? Do they support send? Do they support request for pay? Are they still providers you want to be working with? If this, I don't know if that's a safe thing to say, but this could also be an opportunity to start exploring other providers if you're, looking to do a shift. Introducing a new user experience around real-time payments could be a great way to transition.
I'm going to go ahead and tell you, you are definitely allowed to say that on the payments podium because we want people to be considering these things. And one of the dirtiest words that there is in payments is legacy systems. You say that and it causes people to cringe because I know for a fact, I've talked to dozens of financial institutions that they're like, my core can't handle it. And I'm like, what? What kind of core are you on? And then they'll tell me, I'm like, they still have that? It's still around. It still works type situation. So I agree with you. This is a great opportunity strategy wise for your entire financial institution that when you're looking at providers, maybe you
I've seen some really cool providers out there. Was that looking at Alacrity Solution? They have a nice little payment hub with the hooks to the different rails. I think like Finsley is doing some interesting stuff behind the scenes. So there's a number of different.
Well, Pigeon's doing a lot of the same stuff too.
I'm still
just to
working
make
on.
Sure. That's why I think people need to look at opportunities.
I'm still working on learning about all the different providers out there. There's so many different providers. So I'm building up my little inventory of tech providers that I can, connect banks to.
All right, so we have hit a lot of the key areas, but I know there's always that one thing that, hey, people forget about this, or this is one of those things that just gets overlooked, but it's kind of important. So what is it that, tends to just be overlooked or people don't think is that important when it comes to the process of considering which direction to go, what route to take, how to start offering the service? What is it that you've seen in your experience that maybe this is something everybody should be aware of and be thinking of, even though it's normally overlooked?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I guess one thing that comes to mind is just liquidity management, because I think that's not really top of mind when people are thinking about real-time payments. And it's not as important on receive. Well, on receive, you still have to have the whole action of, as you get all those amounts of, deposits coming in, you still have to, offload them and shift them to your bank. So it's a good problem to have. But contrary wise, I think when we're talking about the sending, like I think it's hard to know because this is still new about like what's the appropriate level of assets to keep in that joint account and how often to refill. Because again, you have the limitations with that joint account that you can still only fill it up during business hours, right? And so you have to kind of anticipate what your a weekend liquidity is going to look like and plan for that. And so I think a good.
Well, that's on the RTP network, because on the FedNow network, when it actually goes live, one of the beautiful things is the LMT tool will let you fund the RTP account as well as your master account for the FedNow network too, anytime. But yeah, right now I agree.
Yeah,
That's a
it's a
hurdle for
big
people.
hurdle, and just staying on top of that, because even if you can fund it at any time, somebody has to be watching and monitoring and paying attention so that you can move those funds. And so one of the options, I think, for both networks is the funding agent. So if you have a provider today that you already
Mm-hmm.
work with that helps you manage your assets, it might be a good way to go for a lot of, especially smaller financial institutions, just to help them manage that until until they get to a point where they feel comfortable where they can run that on their own.
I have to agree. Let somebody else do it for you if you don't want to be working all the darn time. All right. Now, I got actually just one last question to wrap things up today, because this has been some great conversation about, hey, you can make money. And I do want to off of this, offering these faster payment options. I do want to reiterate, folks, you might want to go back and listen. We did talk a little RTP, a little bit of FedNow, but I got to always mention whenever FedNow and RTP come out, they do have different limits and they are not interoperable. That is actually a big thorn in the side of the industry for a lot of people right now, is that they're not interoperable. You also mentioned too, how banks are risk adverse, but starting off on the receiving side is low risk. And, use cases, building your asset base, building revenue and retaining customers. But one of the things I like to always ask everybody that, and they're on the payments podium, especially the professionals that have been out there for a while, is you told us how you got your start in payments. And a lot of people that listen to the podium are new in payments. They're just now getting, started in the industry, trying to learn about all this new stuff while learning about the old stuff, or at least it's old to us. And what advice would you tell somebody who's getting their leg up, just getting started in the payments industry, of what they can do to have a successful career in this industry? Because it is, more than banking. It's electronic banking. It is, it seems like a private crowd sometimes, or a clique of certain people. But what would you tell them that they could do to have a successful career?
One of the fastest ways to stay on top of a very diverse and changing industry is listening to podcasts like yours. Yours is a great source of learning. Going to kind of fintech websites and subscribing to their newsletters like FinExtra or Payments. I like to attend as many webinars as I can. So all my favorite payment topics, every time I see a webinar, I'm like, sign up, sign up, sign up. So I attend a lot of webinars. That's a great way to stay on top. And then talking to people, there's nothing that accelerates your learning faster than talking to a subject matter expert in the topic. So, I guess find your favorite payments experts and reach out to them and pick their brain, or, just let them unload, because there's so much information out there. It's so many different topics to keep on top of. And I don't know that anybody can stay on top of things as fast as everything they're changing. It's like you just do your best, but it's a constant catch up game.
Yeah, it is. If you mentioned a lot of avenues of education, and in this particular industry, education is important and it will never end. Well, Marcia, I want to thank you for being on today's show. For those of you who are out there listening, if you want to get a hold of Marcia, you can find her on LinkedIn. Of course, you can always email the Payments Professor, Kevin@paymentsprofessor.com. I'll definitely get you in contact with her, especially if you're looking for some consulting services. And if there is a topic or a speaker that you would like to see on the Payments Podium, also email me, Kevin@paymentsprofessor.com. I'll do my best to either get that speaker or at least find somebody who can speak to those particular topics that you're looking for. And as always, I got to say, thank you for attending, and class dismissed.